Japanese chisels are very beautiful tools in their own right, but like a lot of Japanese tools, they arrive to the user with a little bit of finishing work to be done to make that tool truly your own and to make that tool the best it can be. So today we're going to look at those steps, and those three steps are setting the hoop of a chisel, flattening the back of a chisel, and sharpening the bevel of the chisel. And with those three steps, that chisel will be cherry ripe and ready to go. The hoops on Japanese chisels are conical. There is a thinner end and a fatter end. So if I were to put this chisel on this hoop on this chisel thuswise, it will only travel down about 12 mil. If I flip that around and set it down again, it'll travel a good 30 mils. This is because it is conical, and as is, in general, the shape of the handle. What we're aiming for with the hoop of the chisel is we'll be using this large tataki nomi, this 30 mil tataki nomi, which comes with a hoop, just pressed on the handle, and we'll be aiming to set it so that the timber mushrooms up above the steel, and this has the function of protecting the steel hoop from the hammer and protecting the hammer from the hoop. While this ring is on the chisel, it can be driven quite heavily without fear of damaging the timber or splitting the timber handle, which gives you a good amount of life in the handle and in the chisel. So the first thing we need to do is pop off the hoop, make sure there's no burrs on the hoop, compress the timber of the handle, and then put the hoop back on. It's that simple. I'm going to begin by clamping an adjustable wrench to the bench. The chisel then sits in that adjustable wrench's mouth so that the hoop sits nicely on the jaws, and I'm going to use a piece of dowel to drift out the centre of the chisel handle. There we go. Important that the chisel does not hit the floor, simply because it can damage the chisel or even worse, your foot. With the hoop off, my aim is to be able to get the hoop back onto the handle while having it sit about 2 millimeters below the top of the handle. I'm going to make sure that I don't have any edges that are going to catch with a rat tail file. And the determining factor of how far this hoop drops over the chisel handle is how small I can effectively make this handle. There are two ways of making this smaller than it currently is. One is to compress it and one is to cut it. I've seen it taught both ways, but I much prefer to compress it. I'm going to use a hardwood block as an anvil. I'm going to use a nice heavy hammer with slow but gentle hits. So with the test fit, we can see that we've got some more work to do. After that round of compression, that hoop is almost flush with the end of the handle. I'm going to give it another little go, and once it's all sitting just below the end of the handle, I'm going to really start giving it a whack. If it's not immediately obvious whereabouts the hoop is snagging on your handle, you can use the old pencil trick by covering the inside of the hoop in pencil and then giving it a twist on the handle. And that will show us whereabouts we're contacting and where not. With that, I can fit that hoop about 1/2 mil to 1 mil over the end of the handle. And that is plenty for the handwork, and we're going to move on to striking it. To finish setting this hoop, I'm going to take a piece of scrap, which is going to act as a backboard for the edge, and I'm going to force the hoop down by using this conical hoop setting tool. The conical shape on the inside of the tool allows me to hit the hoop while not touching the wooden handle. While the hoop is extremely handy and very, very easy to use, you can also use something like a nail puller to bridge over the top of the hoop and strike it down over the handle. For the moment, what I'm going to do is give it a few good hits and see how far the hoop drops. The hoop's dropping nicely. It's dropping a bit faster on one side than the other, so I'm going to concentrate my force over on one side. If I skew this slightly, I should be able to hit that side a bit harder. And if worse comes to worse and you really want to put a bit of force just on one point, you can also hold your hoop setter to one side we go. I want to make sure that my hoop is dropping evenly. So with the hoop set 2 millimeters below the end of the handle, I can move on to mushrooming the timber that's exposed at the top. I like to wet the timber to do this process, and in the classes that have been taught here at JTA, the teachers have generally wet the timber for that. What I'm aiming for is something like this, where I have a nice even coverage all the way to the end of the hoop. If the hoop is particularly large, I would need to drop this hoop a little bit further to make sure I have enough material to spread out over to the side of it. What I'm trying to avoid is something like this, which is a bit scraggly and doesn't reach the sides of the hoop. To get this process underway, I'm going to wet the fibres at the end of the chisel. And I'm going to use the bottom edge of my hammer to start to break and mushroom the fibres. I'm going to work around the outside and then the inside, and then repeat my process. So with about 10 minutes work, I've been able to mushroom the timber out so that it gives nice coverage covering the sides of the hoop so that they can't be struck accidentally with the hammer, and it's also at a good depth so that we've got plenty of cushioning there for our hits. And I would call that ready. I'm very happy with that, and I'm ready to move on and lap the back of the chisel and sharpen the bevel.